Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome everybody, wherever you're dialing in from. We're so excited that you're joining us for yet another very insightful discussion with a woman who's formidable in tech and who has done many incredible things in her career. We're excited for you to listen to her educational and career pursuits and also get some really useful advice with regards to your own career and how you plan out your education. I would like to give a very warm welcome to a dear friend, Arit Amana. She is a woman who's armed with degrees in biology and public health. She's worked as a research analyst for a number of years. And she actually had a very traumatic experience where she lost her job a few years ago, but pivoted and started to, work on building websites. So she basically started a small WordPress agency while also raising her young son. She decided to learn coding when she saw that she lacked the skills to better customize her client's website. So up until that point, she had been providing very basic web development. And despite the stress of raising two kids, with one being an infant, she ended up completing a six-month online coding bootcamp, and she landed her first engineering job 6 months later. This is exciting for us to hear because we just concluded our STEM summer camp today, which was virtual, and we had our virtual coding bootcamp, which ended a couple of weeks ago. So we're very excited that you benefited from participating in a coding bootcamp. Now, Arit spends her time mentoring women, especially mothers, who also want to break into the tech field and basically pivot back into working while raising their children. So without further ado, a very warm welcome to you, Arit. It's wonderful to see you, and over to you.
Ladi, thank you so much. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, right? And I'll jump right into my talk. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. So I am sharing my screen now, and I hope everyone can see. If you cannot see, please leave a message in the chat so that Lade or Jane can go ahead and troubleshoot. Okay. All right, so I hope everyone can see my screen. So thank you again, Lade, for this invitation. And I'm humbled because, the opportunity to speak into lives and encourage people is not to be taken for granted, and I don't take it for granted at all. So I'm very grateful for being asked to speak. I'm going to be talking about what I call my non-linear path to software engineering. And the reason I say that is because it wasn't what I started out wanting to do. And I had several twists and turns. And when I got the invitation from Lade, I was actually a little intimidated because of that, because my story or my journey hasn't been a linear one. Like from school, I chose this and I did it and I got a job in it. And I've been working in that field for all these years. And so it hasn't been linear. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, what would I have to share to high school and college and maybe post-college students, which is what I gather that's who the Viziola Foundation focuses on. But then I thought about the fact that not everyone's journey is going to be linear. And so there's something to be said for people coming from that background. And even if you're just starting out, I think it's helpful to know that there's more than one way. There truly is more than one way to a successful, fulfilling career in STEM. Myself, like Lade said, I'm Arit Amana. I hail from the beautiful Akwa Ibom. And I think my dad is on the call, so, and my mom as well, my family. Born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm the eldest of three sisters. My dad is an engineer, my mother is a lawyer, and they both have advanced degrees in their fields. And so growing up, we grew up around a lot of technology. You know, we had the latest desktop computers. I remember when we had dial-up, you know, installed in our home, and I'm dating myself with that statement. But we had video games. And so technology was a very integral part of our family growing up. But for as young as I can remember, I wanted to be a doctor. And I literally remember telling myself that I was going to specifically be a heart surgeon. I'm gonna operate on people's hearts and you know, help people in that way. And from a very early age, that was what I wanted to do. And I never considered anything else, you know, as far as I can remember. That was always the goal in my mind, was I was going to be a doctor. And so coming to school, both primary and secondary school, I really enjoyed the sciences. Something about science was the idea of how systems work together, and the fact that the circulatory system, you know, complements the digestive system, and, you know, thinking about the ecosystem, like in biology in general, like just something about systems and how they fit and work together always intrigued me. And so by the time I got to secondary school, it was my secondary school, at some point you had to choose between an arts track or a science track. And it was a no-brainer. You know, I picked science because in my mind, I felt like that was where my interest really, really lay. And I was good at it too, which is important to note. I was good at it. I found sciences came easy to me, at least at that stage. And so, yes, I was all about the sciences. So biology, chemistry, physics, you know, those were my central courses. So on to university, I declared a biology major and a chemistry minor. And usually you would declare your major before the end of your second year. So right around my third year, I started taking, because after you declare your major, then all the courses that you're taking kind of dovetail, and you start focusing on those courses that will lead to the major that you have declared. And a major just means the area of study that you're going to specialize in while in university, right? And so my first and second years were great, from what I remember, because for the most part in my university, you had to take a breadth of courses in the initial years just to kind of give you like a breadth of education, so that you're not like so hyper focused on one area and you're kind of illiterate in other areas. But right around my third year, my course load was crazy. It was organic chemistry 1 and 2, microbiology, physical. And so because I had declared my major, I had dovetailed now into taking all these really difficult courses that would lead to a biology major. Difficult for me. I'm not saying difficult in general, but difficult for me. And that is significant for me because I think when I consider my academic career, that was the first time really that I felt I wasn't good enough or I wasn't smart enough. Throughout primary school, secondary school, when I think about it, it was pretty much a breeze. And I was very used to excelling. I was very used to being the best. In secondary school, I always ended up like in the top 3 or the top 5 in my entire class. And when I think about it, I was able to achieve that without really strong concerted effort. And so this was the first time in my academic career where I felt I needed to really push even to be average, right? And so with the difficulty that I was facing with the subjects immaturely, because I was maybe in my early 20s at this point, immaturely, I felt like if I'm struggling, then this isn't for me, right? If something is difficult, it's not that it's just difficult and you work your way through it and you make it on the other side. In my immature mind, I felt like, and I know this now in hindsight, I didn't know it then, but I'm struggling at this, so therefore it can't be for me. And that was the decision I made. And so even though I was on this path to becoming a doctor, I think it was in the last year, I believe my senior year, where I felt I'm not good enough for this because I'm having trouble with these courses. So I'm not going to become a doctor anymore. And that was the decision that I made. And so I chose to pivot to public health epidemiology for two main reasons. First of all, I felt like it was a field close enough to what I had originally wanted to do. So I didn't feel like all the science education that I had gained over the years would be wasted. So that was one reason. And then the second reason was I really did enjoy research. You know, I had picked up research methodology in college. I had learned some things about disease progression. And so I felt for these two reasons, and, you know, part of it too, licking my wounds a little bit, you know, even though at that time I probably would not have admitted that, but I pivoted to public health because I felt it's close enough. I still get to use my science education and I still get to help people, right? So I went ahead, I worked toward my master's in public health with a concentration in epidemiology. And soon after that, I took an analyst job with a research agency in my area. And so majority of what we did was we had clients in the government, so maybe the Department of Transportation or the Department of Health and Human Services. And what we did was to, if the Department of Transportation, for example, wanted to embark on a new initiative or like a new program, they wanted us to do research to figure out like what is the best way to implement this program. And so we would go through like scientific literature and basically create these huge reports that we then presented to, you know, whatever client we're working with. And so 3 years, and I should say during this time, I also got married and had my son. And so 3 years, about 3-4 years into my work with the agency, they decided to merge with a larger company. And as a result of the merger, they eliminated like a lot of jobs. And one of the jobs was mine. And so again, I'm at this point where, okay, this is something I'm doing and now the job is gone. And I think again, mentally, I had not yet developed what I would consider the fortitude mentally or the mental strength to be like, okay, something unexpected has happened, you know, pivot or push through. And so, and then my son being so young at the time, and really, even though there were aspects of my job that I enjoyed as an analyst, I think whether it was the company or the people I was working with or the clients, it just wasn't as exciting, I would say, as I wanted it to be. And so being a young mother, I decided, as many of us do, I decided that I was going to focus more on the home front. I wouldn't say, I write stay-at-home mom, and in essence, I wasn't a stay-at-home mom in the sense that I wasn't doing anything, but my home became a very strong focal point of my life. Like, let me say it that way. And so I decided to kind of put the career, like rah, like I'm going for my career, bam, bam, bam. I decided to put that on the back burner and be more present at home, all right? And so I'm kind of speaking on two tracks in this talk. So I just finished the first track. So that's how I ended up being at home, primarily just focusing on home and raising my son. Now let's go back in time again to college. We're going back to college. Now I was in college, I was a biology major, I was involved in the sciences, but there was a hobby I picked up also in college, where this was around the time when a lot of online communities were coming on the scene. So I don't know if some of you remember MySpace. This was way before Facebook. And so we have these community ecosystems that are popping up. And I picked up a hobby like configuring them. Like I created one for my a cappella group, and I created another one for my student youth group. And I started leveraging these technologies online to just help the groups that I was a part of. And one of the things I enjoyed about this was the fact that we could communicate online without letters. I was still writing letters then, believe it or not, to my friends, you know, and email in college had really started becoming a thing. And so, but I like the fact that people could meet online, we could have our documents online, we could have our communications online in this central place without being limited to emails or letters or phone calls. And when WordPress came on the scene, I pivoted and I loved WordPress. At that time, WordPress was just blogs. And so I would set up blogs for myself. And then my friends saw that I had blogs and they would be like, oh, could you create a blog for me? Show me how to use it. And the WordPress platform itself they built themselves out more, and they moved from just being a blogging platform to hosting full-blown websites and web applications, right? And so as they took off in that direction, I also decided to deepen my skills in WordPress. You know, I remember creating one of the very first WordPress websites I created was for my sister, and she had like a little business that she was launching, and her very first site, you know, was one that I designed, and that was one of my very first sites as well. And so I got into the habit of teaching myself through online tutorials, teaching myself through experimentation. And what I mean by that was trying something and having it break, and then figuring out why it was broken. But what I want to say was all this activity was in the space of a hobby. That was all it was. It was just something I did that I enjoyed. And, you know, it made me happy to help people out who needed simple websites or who needed online community space for kind of whatever they were doing. And so I had been doing this alongside my education, even while I was working on my public health degree. I always had one foot in this lane of leveraging technology online for people's use. And so when I lost the analyst job and decided to stay home, I decided to take it up a notch. And I was like, well, this is something I can do and earn a little bit of money on the side and still be involved in what I enjoy, which is WordPress website building. So I started building for one-person businesses. So someone who maybe does makeup, or someone who is a massage therapist, for example. I started building websites for those kind of one-person businesses. And what I enjoyed was being able not just to put you on the web, which is important, but for example, one of my clients who was a massage therapist, she had a very complicated booking process. Just, you know, paper and pen, you know, diary books or date books. And because it was such a mess, she kept losing business. She kept forgetting that she had booked someone, and then the person would get mad, and then they would say, give me back my deposit, you know. So it was just all over the place. And one of the things that I was able to do for her was, in addition to putting her on the web, I was able to configure a booking portal for her. And so people could book online, and she had a calendar, and if they paid their deposit, then their appointment showed up in her calendar. And she literally went overnight from maybe making a couple hundred a month to like thousands. Not necessarily because her clientele increased, but because she had a process in place that prevented those clients from falling through the cracks. And so as news of my work started spreading and she shared with people and my other clients shared, I started attracting more paying clients and larger businesses, in the sense that not one-person businesses, but maybe like a small legal firm or like a small training program, you know, like on that level. And so when I saw the potential of what I could do to empower people or empower businesses, that was when, right around 2016, I decided to officially register my business, because up until now, I was still kind of treating it like a hobby, almost. But I decided to actually get serious and get professional. And so I registered with the state that I'm in, and I got my tax ID number, and I opened a business banking account, and, I decided to actually have this business called the Brace Agency, and it's actually still online. I'll share the URL at the end and you can check it out. It's not active anymore, but it's still online. And so I'm home, with my family, and I have this small web development agency, right? And everything was great. And like I said, I was getting more and more clients. And as my clientele increased, the complexity of what they were asking me to do also started increasing. And so typically I would, talk with them, get a sense for what do you want your website to look like. And then I would locate a WordPress theme and I would implement the theme. And then I would talk with them, what sort of functionality do you want your website to have? Do you want a booking form? Do you want a place to display videos? And I would find what are called plugins, which are almost little packages of software that you can integrate with your WordPress website. So you're not building it yourself, but it's almost like adding building blocks together. And those plugins would bring the functionality that my clients needed. But when it started getting more complex, I was no longer finding themes that worked, and I was no longer finding plugins that did exactly what the client needed them to do. And so it's as though the needs of my client outgrew my skill set at that point. And it created a lot of frustration for me because I prided myself on being able to deliver solutions to my clients. But here I am, I didn't want to be that business owner who told the client, oh, what you want is too complicated. Like, what does that mean? This is what they need, right? And so for me to say what you want is too complicated, that sounded like a cop-out to me. And so I got to the point where I realized that I could no longer just operate on that level of using what other people had coded. I decided it's time for me to learn how to code. It's time for me to learn how to build the very things that I have been using and joining together and implementing, for my clients. And so I started the same way I did with WordPress. I started taking online tutorials, and there were several of them at the time, watching videos on YouTube and trying to learn how to code. But I started this process. I was pregnant with my daughter, and then I had my daughter. And after having my daughter, the process of teaching myself became very stressful because I'm breastfeeding, she's waking up all hours of the night, I am sleep deprived, I'm healing from the birth. And so again, it was like so much is going on. I'm not even able to sort of self-direct and stay focused on my own. So that was when I decided that I needed help. I needed some kind of structure and some kind of accountability, someone keeping track of what I was doing and a path to follow. And I'm saying it that way because that's how it came in my mind, right? A lot of these things were not things that I planned from the beginning. And I think that's what I'm stressing through my story is sometimes life happens, and what is more important is having the skill to accept that life is happening and make a plan in response, as opposed to having a plan from the very beginning and being confident, being almost rigid, that's the word, in that plan, and not allowing your life to be flexible, right? And so I started researching online boot camps. Boot camps at that time, now there's a lot more online, but at the time I was considering boot camp, a lot of them still were in person, where you went to a school somewhere for like 3 months and you just lived there and they taught you how to code. And that wasn't an option for me because I have kids. And so I was looking at the online options and I did a lot of research. A lot of them had pre-boot camp, like almost like a mini, like a 1-week boot camp at the beginning. And I took several of those to figure out, okay, how do they teach? What are they teaching? And then I decided on the one that I chose, the Fire Hose project. It was 6 months. It was completely online. And what I liked about it was all the information you were going to be learning was already on the platform. So I could pace myself. I wasn't on someone else's timetable. Everything was there. So I could go as fast or as slowly as I needed to. So that was a key thing. So I enrolled, I took the boot camp. In some ways, I loved it, and in some ways, I hated it. And that's what I mean by it's been the most challenging and the most exhilarating endeavor I've embarked on. It was challenging because it required me to think in a new way. I don't have, my degree was in biology, it wasn't in computer science. So I don't even know how to think in terms of how a computer thinks, right? And so I'm learning that. At the same time, I'm picking up skills. At the same time, I'm building applications to add to my portfolio. At the same time, I have 2 young children. So there was just, it was tough, but it was exhilarating in the sense that I really enjoyed building. I enjoyed it. I loved building an application and have it work. Like, you know, being able to log in, being able to save data and have it persist to the database, you know, all those aspects of the process I enjoyed. So it was almost like, if you ask my husband, he would say there were some days when I was like super happy, and then there were some days I was almost cursing and saying, I'm gonna give this nonsense up, you know? So it was almost like an oscillation between the two emotions, I would say. So, and I should say, before I move on, I enrolled in boot camp. That was 6 months. And then I had a 6-month period where I was applying for jobs. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because I want to get more into what being a software engineer entails, because that's the purpose of the talk. But you can definitely ask questions. Like, there's in the Q&A, you feel free to ask me questions about the job search experience, because that is its own talk in and of itself. All right. So what I do now, I work at Forem. It previously used to be known as Dev Community Inc., but we have rebranded and we're now Forem. And so I work for Forem as a software engineer or software developer. Those terms are interchangeable. Some people think engineer is a little bit more elite. I don't believe that. I think they are interchangeable terms. And in a nutshell, what we do is we develop and we power highly customizable online communities, which I think is very interesting because I feel like I've come full circle, because that was the way I entered tech, so to speak, was configuring MySpace and then Facebook and then WordPress, and these were online communities. And so that's what we're doing now, is we have these online communities. You can have members, you can post articles, you can comment, you can have subgroups. And one of the things we pride ourselves on is having very robust moderation and administration tools. And so we all know, Facebook and other online communities, it's very easy to have things devolve into where people are insulting each other or people are being highly disrespectful. And so one of the things that we have built into our platform is the ability to give certain users moderation power, and they moderate the interactions and the content that is happening on the online community. And the idea is to slowly but more permanently create a safer online community, a more respectful online community. Another thing that we are very committed to is data ownership and privacy. And so I'm not going to get into it, but if you've been in the news or you're familiar with what is happening in the tech ecosystem, you know that this privacy thing is a huge thing with Facebook and Google and the other tech giants. And we have taken a different route. And so we allow our users to own their data. We are very big on data privacy. And we really believe that if it belongs to you, then you should have the final say on how that data is used. And so that's one of the ways that we are distinguishable from other similar outfits. I work with interdisciplinary teams, and what that means is we're just not a house full of engineers. We have product managers, we have designers, we have user experience engineers, user interface engineers, we have quality assurance people, we have systems engineers, and they're the ones who take care of more, they're closer to the bare metal, they're closer to the servers that are powering our applications. And I mentioned that because in STEM in general, it's very rare, almost impossible to have any kind of STEM career where you're not touching people from other fields. And so in general, when you're thinking of a STEM career, you really want to prioritize learning how to communicate and learning how to work with people from different fields or different abilities. Because a lot of the work that we do in STEM is collaborative, right? It's not something that one person can build alone. And so I thought that was important to mention. How am I doing on time? Okay, good. All right, so software engineering in a nutshell. I didn't want this slide to go off the rails because software engineering is so huge, not just by virtue of the number of ways that you can be an engineer, but also by virtue of the fact, like I mentioned, you work with so many other disciplines. And so when I was thinking about this slide, and I don't want to spend, like an hour here, which I easily could, but in thinking about the information for this part, I boiled it down to being an interpreter. And I think that's what software engineering is. You are an interpreter, and you stand in between the computer, the server, whatever technology you're leveraging. You're in between that and whatever the user requirements are. And I use the word user in a very loose sense. A user could be yourself, a user could be your client, a user could be the company. The user stands for whoever is going to benefit from whatever you're coding, right? And so software engineering is being an interpreter in between those two entities. You're taking the requirements and you are translating them into a form that the computer system can understand, because we know computers don't speak English or Efik or Yoruba, whatever language, whatever human language that we speak. Computers have their own language. And so you're taking those requirements and you're translating it into a form that the computer can understand. And when the computer understands that, it's able to process then whatever data, whatever resources are required to reach the goal of what you've asked it to do. And then you back translate whatever the computer gives back, you back translate it into a form that the user can understand. In my mind, that's what being a software engineer is about. I think, especially with the rise of boot camps, which I love, I don't have a problem with it, but I think with the rise of boot camps and with the many entry ways into software engineering, it's no longer you have to go to university and get a computer science degree and maybe a master's and then you become an engineer. People still do that, but thankfully, or else I wouldn't be here, that isn't the only way to get into software engineering. But I think as a result of that, I think there's a mindset out there that the goal is to code. I want to be a software engineer so I can code. And I beg to differ. The goal of software engineering is not to code. The coding is a tool, just like a hammer or a screwdriver. The coding itself is a tool. The goal is to solve problems, for example, provide or improve services, or optimize systems or processes. And that's really the goal. And so when you think about it that way, then coding in itself has its own place. You know, you don't glorify it to this pedestal, because the code you write is only as good as the problem it solves. And the code you produce is only as good as the value that it creates for the end user, right? And so that's how I would summarize it. I'm not gonna get, and we can talk about it in Q&A, but I'm not gonna get into like the different languages, frameworks. I mean, it's huge. You go on YouTube and there's just hundreds of videos about so many different languages. I know maybe only about 2 really well. But I think when you think about it in terms of it being a tool towards an end, then it sort of demystifies the whole thing, in my opinion. Talking about characteristics and competencies for software engineering, I don't want to say these are unique to software engineering. I think these are competencies that will help you in literally any field. But in my experience, I feel like these characteristics will certainly help your journey towards software engineering or as an engineer. You need to be a self-learner. You need to be a self-learner. If you need someone to push you to learn, I don't think you're going to do well, because, and it's not this field. I feel like it's all of STEM. Things are changing at such a rapid pace. Newer languages are being designed as we speak. Newer frameworks are being built, more efficient, more optimized. And so if you need to be pushed, then you're always going to be behind the curve. And so you need to be a self-learner. You need to be a self-motivated learner so that you will have, and you will have the ability to stay, not necessarily ahead, that might be a little too much pressure, but definitely in step with the changes that are happening in the field. You need to be tenacious, and that just means you don't give up easily. And that's something I've had to learn. If you had asked 20-year-old me, I would have told you, yes, I'm tenacious. But I think I have learned that I've not been as tenacious as I thought I was, and I have had to learn to be tenacious. I've had to learn to not give up easily. I've had to learn how not to conclude that, oh, this is hard, it's not for me. It's something I had to learn. It didn't come natural to me. You need to be attentive to detail, and that, you're coding, right? You can change like this little characteristic and your whole program will blow up, because computers are so literal like that. They don't have nuances to their language. If you don't declare this as a string, there's going to be problems. If you don't declare this as an integer, there's going to be problems. And so you need to have strong attention to detail. Patience, which goes hand in hand with being tenacious, not being easily frustrated. At the end of the day, software engineering is an exercise in squashing bugs. Either bugs you introduce while you're coding, bugs other people have introduced, bugs that, maybe your system was working in the beginning, but now you have millions of users and now there's bugs because there's so many users. You need the patience to work through lines and lines of error messages. Oh my gosh, just pages and pages of error messages. And sometimes you want to run out the door screaming, but you need that patience to read through those error messages and figure out what's going on. Communication, which I've mentioned before, communication is important because software engineering, you interface with people from different fields. Unless it's like a one-man shop, or like a very early stage startup, chances are you are going to be working with, product, we're going to be working with designers, UX, UI, QA. And so you want to, communication for me is a big thing. Don't think I'm an extrovert, it's going to be easier, I'm an introvert. Communication is a skill, just like so many other things. And when something is a skill, it means that you can get better at it. All right. If it's natural, if it's like the color of skin you were born with. That's not a skill. That's what it is. But when something is a skill, then it means you can improve. And so I would encourage you, try to think about communication in terms of being a skill. It's something you can practice. It's something you can improve in. And it also requires you to learn how to do things afraid. You know, a lot of times people say, oh, I don't like public speaking. You know, I don't like speaking in front of people. It's a skill. It's not, people are not born being able to public speak or not being able to. It's a skill. So think about it that way. And then finally, I would say you need to be a finisher. And this is true for everything, really. It needs to bother you that something isn't finished. You know, there's people who are not bothered. There are people who can do something halfway and just leave it and be fine with that. And I have found that in software engineering, that's not going to get you very far. You need to be a finisher. You need to be that person that just can't really relax until something is done. Not necessarily perfect, but done in the sense that it produces value. It serves its intention, right? Okay. A day in my work life. This is one of the things that Lade's team asked me to talk about. So real quick. So at Forem, I am on the moderation admin tooling team. And so what that just means is I work with the team that we build out everything to do with moderation, everything to do with empowering the moderators on forum communities to build safer, more inclusive communities. Those tools, that's what I build. We use code, we build the features that make their work easier. We are primarily Ruby, Rails, and JavaScript, but we're also introducing other technologies. My typical day includes, you know, a team sync. You know, I meet with my team, what's on fire, what can wait, what needs, you know, what's an emergency, what can wait till next week, where is everyone in their process. I spend several hours every day in deep focus work. And what that just means is I don't have any interruptions. I'm not talking with anyone. I'm not communicating with anyone. It's just me and the code. And so deep focus work for several hours a day, working on whatever I'm working on. Typically in my company, we prioritize pairing. And so what pairing means is just one person is driving on the code, but then people are watching them drive and they're making comments and, you know, correcting. And so it's like group pairing, but only one person's coding, but then there's a group of people, you know, working together. And we do this to either teach each other new skills or to learn new skills. And so that's a typical day in my work life, pretty much. Now, I have an example. I wanted to show an example of a tool that I recently built out with my team. So I'm going to play the video and I hope everyone can see it. All right, so this is a page on one of our communities that we power called dev.to. That's an article that someone has written. And that button that I'm pressing there, it shows up for moderators. And when you click that button, you're able to decide, is this a high quality post, low quality? Do I need to flag something to the admins? We also have an option called set experience level, where you can set is it like for beginners? Is it for like mid-level? Is it for an advanced person? And so this didn't exist a few months ago. And this is something that we built out and our moderators went totally berserk because it was just so awesome for them to have these tools. And the idea is the more you evaluate articles in this way, the higher quality articles are more visible on the platform and the lower quality are less visible. And so what does that do? It sets the tone for the community. It sends the message that these are the type of content that we really enjoy or that we really think is useful. And so that was fun, frustrating, but it was fun. Working on that tool. And there's many more that we're building under the hood, but that was one of the more recent ones. Okay, and so in summary, I think I'm right at 45 minutes. As far as wisdom from my experience, I would say that and this is something that I learned later on, and I think knowing this early will help you. Just because you have interest in something doesn't mean it won't be hard, okay? I think in many ways, we tend to choose what we're interested in based on how easy it comes, right? But being interested in something and the ease of it are two different things. And so I would say, don't let difficulty deter you. Don't let the difficulty of a subject matter make you feel like maybe I shouldn't be interested in this, you know, is what I would say. I love what Viziola Foundation is doing in surrounding you all with professionals. It's awesome. Surround yourself early with professionals from different fields. Doesn't have to be just one field. And, you know, take the risk of stepping out and saying, can I ask you some questions? Can I have a conversation with you? Can I talk to you about your experience, or how did you get to where you are? Take the initiative. Don't wait for people to come and offer to help you. Step out and ask for what you need. The worst that will happen is they'll say no. And then you're no different. You're still back where you started, right? So take the risk. Temporary failure does not mean that your career choice is wrong. You know, people have asked me, like, if you had done something differently, would you have still continued to be a doctor? I'm like, yeah, probably. I don't interpret it as, oh, I was meant to be a software engineer. That is why I didn't pursue medicine anymore. I don't believe that. I feel that when you have the right mentality and when you interpret what you're experiencing correctly, then you're going to get the result of that. And if you misinterpret what you're experiencing, then you're going to get the result of that too. And so I would say temporary failure, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Again, it goes back to not letting difficulty deter you, right? And also understanding that there's more than one way. There isn't just the one way. You know, you might be on a path right now, but that's not the only path that you can use to get to what you want. I would also say how you learn is, I think, even more important than what you learn. Do you always need someone to spoon feed you information for you to get it? Or are you able to take material and read it and struggle with it and digest it and use it and do something with it? The how do you learn? I think it's really important. It's so much, especially for this generation, because there's just an overload of information, right? And so don't focus just on being an expert in biology or being an expert in chemistry or being an expert in electrical engineering. I think it also helps to build your ability to teach yourself and to pick up things that someone isn't sitting and spoon feeding you the information. I think it's very important. And I think it makes you flexible. It allows you to pivot. It allows you to pick up something that you need for a particular task, or, you know, it just makes you more resilient, in my opinion. I think, especially as young women, we need to prioritize growing intellectually. And what I mean by that is, it's not just about your specific academic subject, right? Like what you're learning in school. Value knowledge in general. You know, I wouldn't be where I am today, I don't think, if I hadn't had the interest, the hobby that I had, the WordPress hobby, you know, and I see the connection. I see the connection between that and where I am today. And it's not what I started out learning, right? It's not what I started out learning. And so I think as young women, especially like, you know, teens, you know, like secondary school, university, I think, you know, you're coming into adulthood. It's a lot about your freedom. You know, for many of us who are out of the house for the first time, that's all well and good. Enjoy your life, you know, make friends, fall in love, you know, whatever it is, but prioritize intellectual growth. You know, I'm not saying ignore all the other stuff or pretend that you don't have interests outside school, but prioritize intellectual growth, because knowledge is an investment that will always yield. It's never going to hurt you. It's only going to help you. And then finally, I would say consistency is better than all or nothing, right? And so when I mentor the women that I do, or when I speak at the events that I speak, people ask me, oh, I want to spend 6 hours every day, or I want to spend 8 hours every day learning to code. And what I always tell them is, it's better to spend 30 minutes every day and do that for a year. Because you start out with 6 hours every day, you will be gassed in a week. You'll be done. You'll be done. It's going to be brain overload. But if you spend 30 minutes every single day, and even discipline yourself not to go over 30 minutes, you might have the time, but you can say, you know what, it's 30 minutes, I'm going to stop. And you do that for an entire year, you will be so much further in what you're learning than the all or nothing approach, or the, killing a mosquito with, a machine gun approach, I think, And sometimes when you're enthusiastic, it's easy to go the other way, that, oh, I'm going to spend all day. But try to find a rhythm and try to be consistent with that rhythm, right? Okay, I am done. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I think, so that we can move into the, I guess, the Q&A, right? Okay.
Thank you so much, Arit. So I actually stayed on a little longer because I just couldn't sign off. But I'm frantically tweeting and taking photos and screenshots. So you'll see yourself tagged in a couple of my tweets. But this has been a super interesting, but also really helpful and practical session. And I really appreciate just your candor and just how authentic you've been in sharing your story, and also some of the failures and struggles that you faced. I think too often we try to package our lives as if they're perfect, and we never make mistakes, and we always have everything figured out, and that's just certainly not true. I was also really happy that you mentioned some things that I told the girls this morning. So one, to ask questions, and secondly, to speak up.
Yes.
And not be afraid to make their presence known. So it's really validating to hear somebody else share those exact words of advice. So before I hop off, and Jane is gonna moderate the rest of the Q&A, can you maybe talk a little bit about why you decided to join this company as opposed to continuing the work that you were doing with your own business, and what happened to your clients? And at this point, I'm also going to hop off, but please continue, and Jane will facilitate the questions. And STEM girls rock!
Yes. Thank you, Lade. Great question. I decided, and it was actually a struggle, because I felt a loyalty to my clients, and not only had I served them, but they were paying, but I think I decided to go into actual work because I feared that I would stagnate in terms of my growth. And so boot camp was great, but I knew that a work environment would help me grow even more and help me put into practice what I had learned in boot camp, and also pick up, because I would be working with senior engineers, I would be working with people who had been longer in the field. So I knew that I was going to absorb a lot of that from them. But because I was a solo business owner, I knew that if I just continued the business route, I would stagnate. Eventually I would stagnate, and I wouldn't grow as much as I wanted to grow. And so that's the main reason why I decided to get a job as opposed to continue my business. As far as what I have done with my built for them is working, and they haven't required anything extra. And so for many of them, I'm just able to sort of do a little maintenance, maybe a couple times a year on their sites, and that's doable for me. And for those who, like I have a client who actually pivoted their business and they're doing something completely different, and so they needed a completely different site and application. I've been able to subcontract that work to other WordPress developers. And so for the most part, I guess on paper, I still have a business. I'm still registered. I still do what I need to do to keep my business registration current, but I am not actively pursuing clients or actively working with the clients that I had before. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, I see, it seems people are, Jane, could you let me know, or do I just answer the questions that have been posted in the chat? Because I see a number of them.
Okay, yeah, maybe you could start with those questions.
Okay, okay, I'll do that. All right, so I have a question here. How do I juggle family life with work life? Well, that's the holy grail, isn't it? I feel, I feel anyone with the answer to that would become a billionaire overnight, right? It's a dance that you do every day, I would say. I think I am blessed with the fact that my spouse is pretty laid back, and very supportive, super supportive. And so I think that goes a long way. I think if you have someone who's like super demanding, then that's another, pot of beans, so that helps. And I think having systems, like having systems at home, like, everyone knows we're going to wake up, take your bath, get dressed. I'm going to make lunch. My kids go to daycare, so I'm able to work. And so I'm going to drop them off, and then I'm going to work, and then I'm going to pick them up. And so there's a routine, right? There's a routine that we follow. And I think, especially with kids, once you have a routine, then they know what's up and they know what's next. And so everyone's going in the same direction, right? So it definitely takes discipline. It takes, you need to plan ahead. I need to know, am I boiling beans? Am I making soup? You can't wake up every day and that's when you decide what you're going to do, right? And so you need to make plans, and then you need to also allow for imperfection. There's going to be some days, like there's days when I get called out of work because one of my children is running a fever and I have to pick them up and I have to take them to the clinic, and like things happen. And so it goes back to the flexibility. Don't put yourself in like a box of perfection. Oh, if it's not perfect, it's all messed up. Life is rarely that streamlined almost. So I would say just being flexible as much as you can, and planning ahead and being organized. There's a question, why did you join a company? Oh yeah, I answered that. Okay. All right. What advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career? I think I alluded to this in my talk. I think if I could go back and speak to my younger self, I would really try to convince myself that there's more than one way. I think that is one of the pitfalls of being a high achiever as a child, I think. And I can say this now because I'm older, but I think that is one of the pitfalls. I think when you are used to succeeding, when you are used to excelling, one of the pitfalls is when that is no longer the case, you don't know how to handle it. You don't know how to handle it. And so I think if I could speak to my younger self, I would say it's okay to fail. It's really okay to fail. Not all the time. You shouldn't be failing for like 20 years. That's like a different, we need a psychology, something is wrong. But it's okay to fail. That's what I would tell myself. And if the path you were working with doesn't seem to be working, there's more than one way. Like I know people now who have maybe graduated university in maybe 6 or 7 years as opposed to 4. If you had asked me then, I would have been like, never. That's bad. You know, that's horrible, you know? Like it would never have occurred to me that I can take more than 4 years and do university, you know, because I was so rigid, you know? And so that's what I would tell myself. That's what I would tell myself, I think. There's a question, why didn't you go for your hobby in the early stage because you loved video games? Very good question. You know, I've had this conversation with my sisters. They're like, if you had just stuck with that, you know, you would have been the founder of Facebook by now, you know? That's a good question. I don't know. I know when I remember myself as a child, I wanted to be a doctor. Don't ask me where it came from. I don't think I can tell you. I just knew I wanted to be a doctor. And nobody could tell me anything else. Nobody could tell me different. And I don't know why. I don't know why. It's not like in my, we of course we have doctors, but in my immediate family at that time, at least, even if we had a couple of doctors, I wasn't so close. Like, it's not like my parents were doctors and, you know, I spent my afternoons at a hospital. I couldn't tell you why, but that was just what I felt I wanted to do. A question, what do you enjoy most and least about engineering? Yes, I enjoy, I'll tell you, I love the feeling when something works. Oh, there's nothing like it. You code something, you write tests, the tests are passing, and then you merge it into master, which is you merge it into the code base that, you know, everyone is working off of, and it works. It's like Christmas, you know, because it's so rare. It doesn't happen like that, like from the get-go, you know? And then what I enjoy least is the opposite of that, which is when it doesn't work and you end up spending, I kid you not, there was a feature I was working on. I spent almost 3 weeks not building it out, but just getting it to work. Just getting it to work and dealing with all the edge cases, right? Because it may work like 80% of the time, but then you have these 20% edge cases where it just falls apart. And that is not good enough. If it doesn't work in every use case, it's as good as nonsense. And so no one is going to merge code that works 80% of the time. It's just not good enough, you know? And I spent 3 weeks, 3 hard weeks trying to get that anyway. So yeah. I would like to ask, thinking back 5 to 10 age ago, or 5 to 10 years ago, did you envision this is who you would be? No. 5 to 10 years ago, what was I doing? No, the answer is no. No, I didn't think I would be here. And I think that's important to note. You see, I think we put too high a premium on being able to say what you're going to do in 10 years. We don't even know what's going to happen next week. And that doesn't mean you don't have plans. That doesn't mean you don't aspire to something. But life happens. Life happens. And I think what is more important is being resilient, being flexible, being able to pivot. And pivot doesn't mean, you know, jumping from Earth to Mars. I'm not talking about like those huge jumps, but almost like a palm tree. If you've ever watched a palm tree in a storm, you understand what I'm talking about. Palm trees, if a storm blows through an area with palm trees, after the storm, all of them are still standing. And when you look at the structure of the palm tree trunk, the palm tree trunk is built very different from other trees. It's very flexible, it bends. Other trees don't bend. The wind comes, the branches are, you know, going off. Sometimes the entire tree will lift off from the roots and fall over, but never the palm tree, because the trunk is flexible, you know? So I think that's what's more important, I think. Do you like the fact that you went through a long journey before you could discover what you want? That's an excellent question. Yes and no. Yes, because I think it is the totality of my experiences leading up to where I am today that allows me to be effective in the way that I am today. Like, for example, being able to give this talk, you know, and the type of talk I'm giving. I wouldn't be able to share what I'm sharing if I didn't have the journey that I had. But I say no because whether you like it or not, the time factor, you know, I think because I'm so happy where I am now, in my mind, I feel, if I had been doing this much earlier, then I would have been happy for much longer, right? So I would say that's my no. I think if I have any regret, it would be maybe just not, I mean, how do you say it? You know, your life is your life, right? Your journey is your journey. But I think I'm willing to, I think I would have enjoyed being where I am sooner. Yeah, I would say that. Okay, there's a question here. Okay. How do you see the industry changing in the next few years, and what advice can you give us to be? That's an excellent question. What is the most challenging engineering project? Okay, so those are two. Where do I see this industry going? Well, I see it being very decentralized because it's amazing that you can create so much with just a laptop and a code editor. It's amazing. You know, when you think about other fields, you know, there's so much you need, like a doctor, you need like a clinic, a hospital, you know, you need all these tools, you know, so, but when you think about the fact that you can build the internet with just a code editor, it's amazing. And I think one of the results of that is it decentralizes power. You know, you don't have like a few people who have all the power, or like a few organizations that have all the power. It decentralizes so much. And so I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more young people becoming founders, young people becoming CEOs of their own companies because they have the tools and they have the knowledge, right? I think as far as being a part of it, it goes back to being a self-learner. You know, build the discipline to learn by yourself. It helps. Don't be that person that needs someone to check on you. Are you doing what you should be doing? Are you doing your homework? Are you doing your project? Are you know, I'm not saying that encouragement and motivation is not helpful. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you need to be a self-starter. You need to be a self-starter. You need to realize that the power to move forward is in your hand. It's nobody's job to move you forward. And I think that's something I can say about this present generation is there's a higher sense of entitlement than I think in previous generations. We're so entitled. We're entitled to our rights. We're entitled, you know. No one owes you progress. Nobody. No one owes you success. I don't care if they're your teacher, your mentor, your parents even. No one owes that to you. That is your job to move forward. And so I think more than anything, there's so many tools. There's YouTube, there's videos, there's ways to teach yourself. But I think if you do all that on the foundation of someone who knows how to teach themselves, be proactive, ask those questions, ask to speak to people, risk rejection. Oh, learn how to risk rejection. It will help you. I think you always move forward. The most challenging engineering project I've ever been involved with. It's not one. It's not one. There's so many of them. You know, our time is going, and I really want to get to the other questions, but I'll just say that it's not one. It's many of them. Even the one that I showed in my talk, the moderation panel, that was challenging. That was challenging because we had to really think, like, what are we doing? What are we empowering the moderators to do? you know, and we had to listen to them as well. We had focus groups with the moderators where they told us what they would like to do, what they think is necessary, you know. So a lot of that went into actually deciding, you know, what we're going to build, right? It goes back to communication. In software engineering, you have to know how to shut up, because like I said, the code is a tool. The goal is to provide value for the end user. And how will you know what the end user needs if you don't listen? And listen actively, listen and take in what they're saying. You know, so a big part of software engineering is not talking. Actually, we don't do a lot of talking. We do a lot of listening, because we are the ones building what is needed, right? So we need to understand what is needed. Okay. Oh, somebody asked me, are you happy that you are a software developer instead of a doctor? That's a very good question. Yes, I think I am. But I wouldn't say that it's the software developer itself that makes me happy. I think I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to get to where I am today. That's where the joy comes from. And by extension, I think I'm also very joyful in my ability to encourage others. You know, I think because if you have a very linear track, it's very easy to say, well, everything fell in line for you, or, you know, you knew everyone you had to know, or you had all these connections, you know. But I think when you see a path that, you know, perambulates, I think it's encouraging. And so I would say, yes, I am. Okay. Somebody says, I would like to be a writer. Glory, you're 16, wonderful. I would like to be a writer, but I don't know what type of articles to write on. How do you get the inspiration to write articles? Yes. I have a blog, which I will share. I will share with Jane, and she can forward it to everyone. I'll share my contact information too. My best advice for writing is write about your life, because nobody is a better expert on your life than you. Write about your life, write about what you're learning, write about what you want to learn, write about what you're struggling with, struggling to learn, write about your failures, write about your successes, write about your aspirations, what you want for yourself. I mean, when you write about your life, you always have content, always. You always have what to write about, because your life is ever unfolding, right? And then I think as you start to get better at whatever you're learning, you said you're 16, so you're still in secondary school, but you know, as you're getting better at your subjects in school, maybe there was something that your teacher taught you that maybe you read more about and you found more about beyond what your teacher taught you, you can write about that. I'll say this, you don't have to write what nobody has written. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. A lot of people get stuck. Why should I write about JavaScript arrays when thousands of people have written about JavaScript arrays? That's not a reason. If you have the idea, write it. I don't care if you're the millionth person to write it. There's someone that will read what you wrote and get more from it than all the other people who wrote about the same thing. And that's the truth. So don't use the fact that someone has done it before to say that you're not going to do it. You know how many businesses were improvements on former businesses? Like you have Uber, that was an improvement on taxis, you know. You have Forem, which I believe will be an improvement on Facebook, you know. So that someone has done something before does not disqualify you from also doing it. You might do it better or just different, right? Okay. Since you did not go to engineering school, how was the company able to accept you as their employee? That's an excellent question. Wow. Yeah, I said the subject of my job search is a talk in and of itself, because it was crazy. It was crazy. I think what it boiled down to was a couple of things. I was able to convince them that because I'm quote unquote older, and because I have experiences as a business owner, I was able to prove to them that I have the ability to take business requirements and translate them into code. I was able to prove that because I was able to tell them, look at this client, they needed this, this was their problem, I implemented this, this was the result, client is happy. Because like I said, coding is a tool, it's not the goal. The goal for the company is to make money. So they want you to come in and use code to make them money. And so I think I was able to convince them that I understand that process. I understand the importance of making money at the end of the day. And I think another thing too that I was able, that helped me land the job was I was humble in the sense that I didn't try to pretend. Like I remember my first job when I was talking with the director of my department, one of the things he told me that made them choose me, because it came down to me and a very senior person. So like the job, it was one job and it was me or a senior developer, and they chose me. And one of the reasons he said they chose me was because when they asked me questions on a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at JavaScript? On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at Rails? On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at CSS? I never said anything more than 5. And that was for HTML, you know, which is like the most basic, you know, like you have to know HTML to know any other thing, you know? And I never said anything more than 5. And he said that really struck them because every other person who interviewed were saying 8, 9. So some people said 10, you know, like really, like you know all there is to know about JavaScript, right? And so I think that's another thing that I, you know, I think they were happy that I didn't think too highly of myself in terms of my skills, not my worth or my value, but in terms of my skills. Yes. Okay, let's see. What personal projects do you have going on outside of work? At this point, none. And I say that with no shame because my job is tough enough as it is, and then I have a family. But I can talk about the projects that I had, and I should say this, I don't want that to be the case forever, you know. So I'm hoping to be able to get to having some coding projects in addition to, but as of right now, I don't have the time or the bandwidth for that. The projects that I built in bootcamp, they're still online, I think. I'll send Jane all this information so you can take a look for yourself. But I will say, as far as like what I do outside of work, it's stuff like this. So I call it, you know, people say, oh, what do you do? I'm like, okay, I have my career, which is like my career, but then I also have what I call my tech community engagement. And that's what I'm doing now, because I think it's so important to have representation and for younger people to see what is possible, you know, through, you know, what you've been able to do. So I call it my tech community engagement. So I give talks, I speak at conferences, I do workshops. So I think in terms of, so that's not like a personal coding project, but it's certainly something I do outside of work, right? Okay, Stephanie, and that was from Christabella, 17, awesome. Stephanie, 16, she says, how do you stay up to date and keep your skills sharp? Excellent question. I don't even think I'm doing as good a job of it now as I should, to be very honest, and I'm working to change that. But as far as staying up to date, I think being on the job helps, because when you have seniors, when you have people who are more experienced than you and you work with them regularly, I think it helps. You level up without even really trying because you're absorbing from them, right? But as far as more deliberate staying up to date, I read a lot. I am a member of many, like I follow many blogs that are written by, I mean, the thought leaders in software development. You know, tutorials are great. I think this is the thing that I would caution against. Sometimes you learn with no purpose. That's why I think projects are so good. You know, don't just, oh, I'm going to learn React. Why? Always ask why. Why? Why are you learning React? Just to learn? If you learn something just to learn, you will forget it just as fast. You will forget it just as fast. I think it's important to tie what you're learning to a goal. So I want to build a new portfolio website for myself, and I'm going to do it in React. Bingo. Now you have a reason to learn React because you want to build a new portfolio website. And I think when you tie your learning to goals, when you tie your learning to outcomes, it sticks more than if you're just learning just to learn. You're not doing anything with it. You're not building anything. You're not creating anything. You're just learning. You know, I think that helps. Okay, Gabe. Oh, Gabriel. What is your approach to learning new languages to handle new projects? It's a great question. Okay, so I'll be honest. If it's a project at work that I need to pick something up in order to do, I just pick up the bare minimum, because at the end of the day, I need to ship this thing, right? Like whatever I'm building, I need to ship it, you know? Yeah. So I think I pick up, so what happens is I learn a little bit, and then I go to my code and I try it and it fails. And then it fails, then I go back to the resource and I try to figure out why did it fail. And then in figuring out why it failed, I learn something new. And then I apply that. And then maybe the old error is resolved, but now I have a new error. And so now I have a new error. And so then I go back to the resource. Why do I have this new error? And then I learn something else. And so I very rarely, I won't just jump, you know, head to toe inside whatever I'm trying to pick up. I take pieces and I apply. I take pieces and I apply. And if what I'm applying isn't working, then I go back and I learn more and I apply. And so that way, I don't end up absorbing more than I need for the task at hand. And the little that I'm absorbing stays with me. And so I'll give you an example. There was a feature I was building, and one of the seniors said, Arit, I want you to use Stimulus.js. And Stimulus.js, it's a framework that allows you to build controllers in JavaScript. I wouldn't say more than that, but needless to say, I don't know what Stimulus.js is from Adam, you know? And they have beautiful documentation, but it was a lot. And I was like, I am not trying to really know. So what I did was I read a little bit and I tried something, and you know, I kept going back and forth until I built the controller and I had everything hooked up and everything was working. I haven't touched Stimulus.js since then because I haven't needed to. Some people may say, oh, you know, at the end of the day, you have to balance your life, you know? You can't really code 24/7 unless you literally are not responsible for anybody but yourself, you know? But once you have responsibility, it doesn't even have to be family. It could just be, you know, you have other things that you're about, right? You have a full life. I think there's a balance between like just opening your mouth and stuffing everything inside and not learning anything at all. You have to find the balance. You have to find, you know, kind of like, you have to figure out like, how much am I going to learn that allows me to accomplish something? And I think you just have to find that balance for yourself. There are people who will tell you different. Some people will tell you, learn everything you can. I'm not in that camp. I'm not in that camp. What is your advice to us that have two things we want to become in life? Excellent question. How related are the two things? That's the first thing I would ask. And I don't know, you know, you don't have to answer. But how related? Are they like on opposite side of the world? Like, is it like, I want to be a dancer professionally, or I want to be a doctor? You know, like, is it that separate, you know? I think, you know, people say you can be anything you want to be, and it's true. But there's also the reality of life and the fact that you're not going to be alive for 500 years to try everything, right? And you also have to make a living and pay your bills, right? So I think that's the reason why we have extracurriculars. I think that's the reason why we have hobbies. That's the reason why, some people say, do what you love, like whatever you do for your career, make sure you love it. That's not always practical, to be honest. At the end of the day, you have bills to pay, And so I think consider what you enjoy, but also consider what can earn you a good living. It's important. It's important. When you're young, and especially when you're young and, you have your family still taking care of you for the most part, and, you don't have all these responsibilities, it's very easy to just choose, people say, I want to be a rapper. I have nothing against rap. I enjoy rap myself, but the truth is life is a reality. Bills are a reality. Expenses are a reality. And so you also want to think about what can earn you a good enough living. Good enough. And good enough is different for different people, but a good enough living. You also want to think about the longevity of what you're getting into. Like software engineering is not going anywhere. Not going anywhere. And I'm not saying, for the most part, STEM is not going anywhere, right? And I love that Viziola Foundation is so committed to STEM empowerment, because STEM is not going anywhere. And so you also want to think about that. And then I would say talk with people. The two things you want to become: find people who are doing it, find people who have just started, and find people who have been doing it for 20 years. Don't just go for the 20-year people, because they will always have a different perspective. Also find people who just started, 2-3 years in. Find people who are maybe 8-10 years in. And then if you can, find someone who's 20 years in and talk to all of them, because they're all going to have something different to say, I think, So knowledge is your power, in making that decision. And ultimately, you can pivot. You can pivot. You can. It's not always easy. It's not always easy, but you don't have to. It's not like a prison sentence. Just because you chose something at the beginning, it doesn't mean that come hell or high water, you have to keep doing that thing. It doesn't. I'm not advocating for switching back and forth like a kangaroo. That's also, no, you don't, because depth of knowledge is very valuable. Expertise is valuable. So I'm not saying you should switch focus every 6 months. That is also a no-no. But by no means don't feel that because you chose something today, it has to be what you're doing 30 years from now. Yeah. Zanetta, what do you think is the relationship between software engineering and accounting? Oh my gosh, one of the biggest fields, and when I say big, not biggest like in size, but like one of the fields that is really exploding now is fintech, financial tech. Oh, like, that's not my field, but it's exploding, all right? All these mobile banking, sending money, receiving money, and cryptocurrency, it's huge, right? And so I think if you have an accounting background and you're thinking of software engineering, oh, trust me, there's a space for you, as they say. I think because accounting is so precise, it's such a precise field. It's all about detail. It's all about, down to the last cent, kobo, whatever. And in many ways, you're already working with algorithms, right? Like in accounting, you're already working with algorithms and you're figuring out, how to reconcile things. I mean, I think there's pretty good overlap in terms of competencies, maybe not subject matter, but in terms of how to think, I think there's good overlap there. So I can certainly see an accountant pivoting to software engineering. You just have to get through the whole coding thing. And then of course, working together. I mean, there's no way, if you're working for a fintech company, you're going to collaborate with accountants. You're going to collaborate with financial people, So definitely, I hope that answers your question, but that's what I thought. Queen Esther, 15, how many years did it take you to know and to become a software engineer, and was it fun and interesting? Yeah, I talked about this in my talk. From the moment I started learning, like the moment I started learning officially. And so for several months before I joined bootcamp, I had been on YouTube and, you know, other like Travesty Media. There's so many, you know, Wes Boss, oh, I love him. You know, he has so many tutorials, you know, so I had been self-teaching. But like I said, with my infant daughter healing from birth, you know, so many things were going on. So I decided to do boot camp. So from the time I started boot camp to when I landed my first job was exactly 11 months. From the beginning of boot camp to my first job was 11 months. And so my boot camp was, no, wait, I lied. No, I didn't lie. Boot camp was February, yeah. From boot camp, yes, to my landing my first job was 11 months. Yes. Okay, I think that's all the questions in the chat, Jane. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions in the chat. So
yes, and even the students that we are having questions, they all typed it in the chat box.
Okay, good.
So I answered everything, yes. So on that note, we are going to call it a day here. You've shared so many nuggets. Build the discipline to learn by yourself. You need to be a self-starter. Students, don't forget that. You need to be a self-starter and realize that the power to move forward is in your hands. Yes. On that note, I just want to say thank you again for spending time with us. And we really appreciate the valuable insight and openness in sharing your story and some of the lessons that have helped you to become successful in your career. And we look forward to engaging with you more in the future. Sure. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much once again, and have a great rest of the day and a wonderful weekend.
I will. Thank you, everyone. STEM girls rock, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was great. Thank you. Like I said, I'll send my contact to Miss Jane, and so she can circulate it to everyone. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.